Hello and welcome back to U.S. History with Mr. Snyder. Today we are going to talk about the heating up of the Cold War and some of the worldwide conflicts that the United States and the Soviet Union indirectly got into in the 1950s. Your learning targets for today are to talk about the causes and results of the arms race between the Soviet Union and the United States. We'll compare and contrast our new president's response to communism with Truman's. We will also, and lastly, analyze the Cold War conflicts that erupted in Eastern Europe, the Middle East, and other places in the world. So let's get started. The hydrogen bomb is being developed in the United States, and the hydrogen bomb is even more powerful than the atomic bomb. It just uses, instead of uranium, it uses hydrogen. It is equivalent to 1 million tons of dynamite. And although these are tested, they never were used in war because there's the question of whether or not they are a moral weapon. And so we get our first bomb in 1952, and less than a year later, the Soviet Union detonates their first H-bomb. So the United States no longer has a monopoly on atomic weaponry, and the Soviet Union has just as powerful of weapons as we do. And so this leads to a perpetual arms race. So throughout the Cold War, we are both, the United States and the Soviet Union, are trying to stockpile increasingly powerful nuclear weapons. And this leads to an arms race. And why don't we use these on each other then? If we're just making weapons to make weapons and we don't fire them, we don't do it because of mutually assured destruction. And what that is if we fire our weapons, we don't have enough time to destroy all of theirs before they would fire some of their nuclear weapons at us, and it would effectively result in the destruction of the attacker and the defender. And so we don't attack each other because it would bring an end to human civilization, even though we both have the power to destroy each other over and over and over and over again. Our new president, after the Truman debacles in Korea, and even though Truman would not have been able to run again with the passage of the 22nd Amendment, which finally limits a president to 2 terms, Roosevelt was the only person who did more than 2 terms. So Eisenhower is elected in 1952 and 1956. He's the supreme Allied commander of the Allied forces in Europe during World War II. And he changes our foreign policy from containment to a more aggressive policy called Brinksmanship. So he shifts the military funding for troops and guns to nuclear weapons. Not all of them, just some of them. And his new Secretary of State is called John Foster Dulles, and he's extremely anti-communist. And he brings forth the policy of brinksmanship, and Eisenhower accepts it. And brinksmanship is the willingness to go to the edge of all-out war, or to the brink of all-out war. And we threaten an enemy with massive retaliation. So that'd be any aggression around the world, we would retaliate with nuclear weapons. So we trim back funding for our Army and our Navy, and we beef up the Air Force to deliver these bombs. So that's brinksmanship and massive retaliation. They go hand in hand. Nikita Khrushchev, if you want to say that out loud, Khrushchev succeeds Stalin. Stalin dies in 1953, and relations cool off a little bit between the Soviet Union and the United States. Since the Korean War, they were pretty hot. They cool off after Nikita Khrushchev takes over, because he's still a hardline communist and he's very patriotic for his country, but he believes that communism will take over the world peacefully. There are some uprisings in Eastern Europe under Khrushchev's watch, one in Hungary, one in Poland. The citizens of Hungary rise up against the Stalinist government because they want democracy. And in 1956, instead of just telling the people to go away, Soviet tanks roll in and kill 30,000 Hungarians. in order to put a stop to this. They basically put their steel-toed boot down and say that, listen, this is the way it's going to be. You're not going to have democracy. Didn't mean for that to rhyme. 100,000 people protest the dictatorship in Poland. 100 people are killed in this uprising in Poland, and it leads to nothing. It does lead to a less dictatorial government, but it still does accomplish very little. And then finally, we have the Suez Canal crisis. The Egyptian president, Nasser, wants to construct a dam on the Nile River. He thinks that that will be profitable for his country. The U.S. and Britain offer to fund the project, but after he talks to the Soviet Union and agrees to do it with them, they withdraw their support. And so Nasser places the Suez Canal under government control, and that means nationalizing something. In our country, for example, essentially our healthcare system has been nationalized by the federal government. That means Obamacare is the government healthcare program. It's been nationalized. So this Suez Canal, these ships carrying oil from the Middle East travel through here. So the president of Egypt nationalizing it threatens the flow of oil to Europe. And so Britain and France join with Israel, the new country, Jewish country, and they take control of the Suez Canal without the United States. They do this on their own, and Ike is very upset because this could have started World War III, this battle over the Suez Canal. He condemns the actions. We talk with Khrushchev. It was a misunderstanding, and it goes from there. This does lead to the Eisenhower Doctrine, issued in January 1957. It's basically a Truman Doctrine for the Middle East. So the United States would defend any Middle Eastern country against an attack by any communist country. And we do have some meddling during the Eisenhower administration in the Middle East. Eisenhower uses the CIA, which is formed out of the intelligence gathering operations during World War II. So it's officially formed in 1947 to gather information from around the world. These are our spies. Also, Eisenhower uses them to carry out secret or covert operations to weaken governments that are unfriendly to the United States, or to overthrow governments unfriendly to the United States. And in the Middle East, we overthrow the prime minister of Iran, and we install a pro-American, his name is the Shah of Iran. And he is very friendly to the United States, but he still is very, very oppressive of his people. So what we did in the past affects us today, and that's called blowback in the covert operations community. Why do Iranians hate the United States today? Why don't we get along? Because 60 years ago, we overthrew their leader and installed a leader that was just friendly to the United States. We didn't care what he did to his own people. And finally, this brings us to the space race, and the Soviets beat the Americans to space. They launched the first man-made satellite in 1957. It's the world's first artificial satellite, and it's called Sputnik, or Sputnik. It travels the world at 18,000 miles per hour because of the Earth's rotation. It circles the globe every 96 minutes, and it's just a little steel ball. It's like a fancy radio antenna. That's all it was. But we immediately begin to pour money and effort into our own space program called NASA, or the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. And schools, which were before that emphasized being a good citizen and a part of America, social studies, they now are recentered around math and science because we have to create little scientists to beat the Russians at their own game. And that emphasis is still there today around math and science. And so that is all I have for you today. Be sure to fill out your learning targets, and I will see you later. Goodbye.